we'd had a situation where for much of the first quarter of this year, the rand had appreciated significantly against the dollar. 30% is the figure that's been bandied about. And just in a matter of days last week, the rand had started to depreciate, and largely because of risk aversion in the European markets. Things are a little better today after the announcement of a bailout package, but what are we likely to see for the rand and its volatility?
Well, as you just said, better today and started yesterday. Just remember, it is appropriate to the weather at this particular time. One day doesn't make a summer, and it's a long way away. Just one point, the rand appreciated by 30% compared to a year ago. Over this quarter. It's been in a fairly narrow range as far as rand trading is concerned. And I think very much governed by international risk appetite, which has turned into risk aversion. The rand is part of the emerging market complex, or South Africa is, and the currency is subject to extreme short-term inflows and outflows, which either buoy the rand, strengthen it, or weaken it. At the moment, we saw this big fright on the possible risk of the Greek fiscal problems spreading further, and that was led to a capital outflow.
All right, now the euro's rebounded, at least from the 14-month lows that we've seen, and the rand is now trading somewhere between 7.4, and it's expected it could go as far as 7.6. What do you expect?
Well, by rand terms, that's a fairly narrow range. Our view is that over the next month, which is quite a long time in our market terms, it probably is going to hover around that sort of 730, 770 range. I think that the stability that's going to be brought to the markets by the announcement of this Eurozone package is going to add a lot to the investors' view that maybe they don't have to have quite as big a fright for funds deserting the emerging markets and the rand.
Now, the unfortunate issue is that the rand's volatility is influenced by exogenous factors, not necessarily a whole host of issues happening within South Africa. Just talk to us about the issues at the moment that are going to have direct bearing on the rand.
Well, let's first of all look at what started this crisis, and it is a crisis. It's a world crisis. It's not just Greece. Greece mismanaged their fiscal problems. What they did was to spend a heck of a lot more than they earned, and gradually built up debts, the cost of which became unmanageable. As soon as it was seen that this was getting out of control, their interest rates went rocketing up from, say, 4% to 14%, literally in a few days, and it was just quite clear that they would not be able to raise funds. Nobody was going to lend it to them, and that just a ripple-through effect onto what they call the PIGS group. Dreadful description that, but anyway, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, Italy, could it go on to them? Yes, that was the risk, and that could then have rippled through into emerging markets, including South Africa.
Now, yesterday there was a meeting at Nedbank, Labour and Industry, and what came out of there was some sort of a memorandum or a suggestion by big business, companies like ArcelorMittal, agreeing with the Labour position that the rand needs some kind of an intervention to weaken it somewhere to about 850 levels so that you can shore up exports. Now, this isn't new, the suggestion of intervening on the rand, but the momentum and the impetus to get the Reserve Bank and the Treasury to do something is growing. What are your views on this one?
Well, I question the argument itself to start with. If we have a weaker rand, we will in due course import a greater rate of inflation. It's all very well to say, yes, temporarily our exports will become globally more price competitive, and that is quite true. They will. Temporarily. But when we come to import the machinery to manufacture more imports, or we need more mining equipment, then what we find that it costs a heck of a lot more, and your unit production costs go soaring, and we're no longer competitive in global markets. So I'm afraid I think that it would be short-sighted, because what that would do is introduce a vicious circle of needing more weakening of the rand, and I don't think that we can do that.
All right, let's bring Chris Gilmore into this conversation. Stabilizing the rand from the recent volatility, some people say a more palatable level is 850 to the dollar. Now, it creates two diametrically opposed views. Those who support the stronger rand, or one that's free-floating, say it's an indication of the confidence levels that exist in this economy and the demand for people to invest in the economy and the portfolio flows that will come. because of an attractive rand. The others who are pushing for exports, and there's a big constituency in the country, are saying you can't have growth in this country, you can't create jobs in this country for as long as the rand is what it is, because you can't export as much.
I think there are two elements. I agree entirely with Ian here, but there are a couple of things. First of all, the rand against a trade-weighted basket of other currencies is probably fairly valued. I've seen a lot of work on this, and it suggests that, in fact, it's probably round about being fairly valued. We have this obsession with the dollar, perhaps because all of our commodities are priced in dollars, and we think it's the be-all and end-all. But in fact, it's actually probably fairly valued. The other question that arises, well, it's all very well to have these aspirations for a weaker rand, but how on earth do you achieve it? I mean, far bigger countries and people than South Africa have tried and failed. Mm-hmm. I mean, when George Soros was doing his thing in the early 90s with the pound, the UK authorities thought they could take him on. Well, they made a mess of things. Last year, the Russians tried to beef up the ruble, and all they did was they wasted an awful lot of precious foreign exchange. Yeah. So the foreign exchange markets are far, far, far bigger than any government or country. And I think these people, although I think their concerns are very earnest, they should perhaps be redirecting their focus to ways of making industry more efficient, because that's at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. If you keep on devaluing your currency, it's just a crutch. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, as Ian says, you get into this vicious circle, and it gets worse and worse and worse. It doesn't really help in the long run.
But the rallying call is getting louder and louder, and it's not the first time. After 9/11, the events of September 11th, a few years ago, there were calls for a rand commission, because they had a situation where the rand was something like 16 rands to £1. It didn't happen, but as I said, the impetus is growing. Now there are calls to review the carry trade. At some point, something's got to give, because when industry starts to band together with labour for interventions, the government's got to sit up and listen, and not just say, we'll leave it to the devices of the market. What would be reasonable action on the part of the Reserve Bank?
To try, they have this phrase they use, leaning against the wind. Stability is most important. It's more important than the actual rate itself. Then you can have proper business planning. If one can continue to expect the rand, say in a reasonable range of R7.50 to R8, and then one knows what one's cost structure is, one knows what one's fixed capital costs are, that would be much better in the longer run. And stability would mean that the Reserve Bank could possibly make small forays into the market. But remember, our reserves cover no more than 6 months of imports. Yeah. We haven't got the firepower. Yeah. Remember what Dr. Stolz did by trying to stand up against the markets. He bankrupted the currency. They effectively ran down our reserves to a negative number. We can't afford it.
All right, MPC meets this week.
Yes.
Although Jill Marcus has been adamant that there'll be no rate cut, forces have changed somewhat around her. What is she likely to do, given the volatility of the rand in recent days?
I think we should pay attention to what she said. You ignore the governor at your peril. She said it's very unlikely, unless there are exceptional circumstances, in very much weaker economic data. We've had weak economic data, but nothing newly disastrous. I don't think there's enough of a new spur to persuade them to do anything yet. They like to wait and see what has happened, and I think we're in that mode. If we find that the pace of the pickup isn't improving, right, retail sales are poor, credit demand is very poor as it is, then maybe in July there's a better chance of a rate cut. That would be our call.